James adjusted the strap of his duffel bag as he stood on the sidewalk of his new neighborhood. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows over the neat rows of identical houses. Pristine lawns, freshly painted fences, and spotless sidewalks. It was the kind of place people imagined when they thought of suburban peace and quiet. After years overseas, after the endless chaos of deployment, James had dreamed of exactly this: calm, safety, and a fresh start. But as he took his first tentative steps toward his mailbox, something didn't sit right. A woman stood just beyond the corner of the street, arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her sharp eyes were fixed on him, narrowing with a mix of suspicion and something colder, something almost hostile. Karen, the neighborhood HOA president, James would learn later. A woman who ruled this tiny kingdom with an iron fist and a chilling smile. James tried not to meet her gaze. He unlocked his mailbox with the small key the realtor had given him. It was empty. That was odd. He shrugged it off. Maybe the mail hadn't arrived yet. But inside, a slow gnawing unease began to grow. Over the next few days, the feeling only got worse. James noticed subtle things. A glance that lingered too long from behind curtains. A car that seemed to slow down whenever he walked by. The sudden silence of the neighbors when he approached. And then his mail started disappearing. First, it was a single letter, then a small package. James found the mailbox door slightly ajar, more than once, as if someone had been rifling through it. His heart pounded the first time it happened. Why would anyone do this? He asked a few neighbors. Polite hellos turned into wary shrugs and nervous glances. One woman, a middle-aged lady with kind eyes, whispered, "Karen's got her ways. Best not to cross her." James frowned. Why would the HOA president care about his mail? The unanswered questions piled up. One evening, as James sat on his porch, reviewing bills and letters he had finally managed to collect from the post office, a sudden noise made him freeze. There, down the street, stood Karen. She was clutching a bundle of papers, her eyes scanning the road. She looked like a judge ready to pass sentence. Curiosity won over caution. James grabbed his phone and quietly stepped outside. Keeping to the shadows, he followed her at a distance. Karen moved with a purpose, heading straight to a small trash bin behind the community mailbox station. Without hesitation, she ripped open the envelopes and scattered their contents into the bin. James's breath caught as he recognized his own handwriting on one of the torn letters. His pulse hammered in his ears. Why was she destroying his mail? Worse, what was she saying? Karen muttered under her breath. He doesn't deserve this. Not after what he's done. James couldn't make out the last words, but the venom in her voice was unmistakable. The quiet suburbs suddenly felt like a cage. James retreated into the shadows, mind racing with questions and fear. What had he walked into? And more importantly, how far would Karen go to keep him out as he turned back to his house? A chilling thought took root. In a place that promised peace, war had followed him home. And it was just beginning. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of James's modest living room, but the warmth failed to penetrate the cold knot in his stomach. Sleep had been elusive since the mail incident. That woman, Karen, loomed large in his thoughts, like a shadow he couldn't shake. The neighborhood might have looked perfect from a distance, but James had begun to see cracks beneath the surface. The carefully manicured lawns and freshly painted fences were only the mask for something far more sinister. He had heard stories about Karen, the HOA president with a reputation for mercilessly enforcing rules that seemed to change on a whim. A stickler who loved control more than community. Determined to get answers, James decided to attend the next HOA meeting, hoping to confront Karen directly. Maybe he could find a way to bring some reason into the situation. The community center was buzzing when James arrived. A crowd of homeowners clustered in tight groups, exchanging nervous whispers. The air smelled faintly of stale coffee and tension. Karen stood at the front, clipboard in hand, radiating authority. Her perfectly coiffed hair and sharp suit contrasted with the coldness in her eyes. As James approached, the room seemed to hold its breath. Several neighbors glanced at him with curiosity, some with thinly veiled suspicion. Karen's gaze locked onto James the moment he stepped inside. A slow, predatory smile spread across her lips. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with condescension. The new veteran decided to show up. A murmur rippled through the crowd. James took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I have questions about the rules you enforce, and, specifically, about my missing mail." Karen's eyes narrowed. "The rules are clear. Mailboxes must be kept neat. Packages should be promptly collected. Any violations," she paused dramatically, "will be dealt with." James felt a flicker of dread. "But why destroy my mail? Why tell me I don't deserve it?" The room went silent. Karen's smile twisted into something darker. "Maybe you don't," she said softly, her voice low enough only James could hear. A cold shiver ran down his spine. The meeting went on, but Karen dominated every word. She rattled off lists of infractions and fines, each seemingly targeted at James. An unsigned letter had been filed accusing him of disruptive behavior. It was clear Karen was orchestrating a campaign to intimidate him. Neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared speak up. After the meeting, James lingered, determined to speak privately with Karen. She stood near the exit, arms crossed. "Why? Are you doing this?" he asked quietly. Karen's eyes gleamed with a mixture of anger and something James couldn't place. Pain? Resentment. "You think you're special because you served," she said sharply. "But this neighborhood isn't. For everyone. Not for people like you." James felt a surge of disbelief. "People like me? What does that mean?" Karen stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Some wounds don't heal, soldier. Some debts never get paid." Then, without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving James with more questions than answers. That night, James sat by his mailbox again, a quiet storm brewing inside him. He wasn't just fighting lost mail anymore. He was fighting a war on a different front, a war for respect, dignity, and belonging. But Karen wasn't just an adversary. She was a mystery wrapped in hostility. What secrets was she hiding? And why did she hate him so much? The peaceful suburb had revealed its darker underbelly, and James was caught right in the middle. Days passed, but the feeling of being watched never left James. Every time he stepped outside, he half expected to see Karen lurking nearby, her cold gaze dissecting him, and in a way, she was always there. His mailbox became a battleground. James grew more vigilant. Every morning he checked for mail, and every morning more pieces were gone. Letters, bills, even a few personal notes he'd been waiting for. It was as if the neighborhood itself was conspiring against him. Desperation pushed him to take action. One night, under the cloak of darkness, he installed a small camera, hidden behind a bush near his mailbox. The device was cheap but effective, a silent witness to what he suspected was Karen's handiwork. For 2 nights, James waited. The silence stretched unbearably. Then, in the early hours of the 3rd night, the camera caught movement. His heart hammered as the video revealed a figure approaching his mailbox. It was Karen. She moved deliberately, almost like a predator. James watched, breathless. as she pulled out letters and packages. Tearing envelopes with practiced ease, her lips moved, whispering venomous words that chilled James to his core. "He doesn't deserve this," she hissed, pausing to rip another envelope into shreds. "Not after everything he's done." James replayed the clip, straining to catch the last part. What was she saying? What did she mean? The next morning, James felt a mixture of anger and fear. This wasn't just petty harassment anymore. It was personal. He decided to confront Karen again, but this time with evidence. He emailed the HOA board, attaching screenshots from the video, demanding a meeting to address the harassment, but Karen was quick to respond. She denied everything and accused James of fabricating evidence. Her email was laced with threats of fines and legal action if he continued to disrupt the community. Tension rippled through the neighborhood. Whispers spread like wildfire. Some supported Karen's version. Others quietly backed James. One afternoon, James noticed a flyer slipped under his door, anonymous, accusing him of being unstable, dangerous even. Someone wanted to discredit him. His sense of isolation deepened, yet a spark of hope flickered when a few neighbors approached him discreetly. An elderly man, Mr. Benson, shook his head with quiet sympathy. "Karen's had a long history," he said softly. "She's not just strict, she's ruthless, and she's scared of anyone who threatens her control." James realized he wasn't alone, but standing up meant risking more. Late that night, a sudden crash outside startled him. Rushing to the window, James caught a shadow fleeing his yard. His mailbox lay in pieces on the ground. The war had escalated. Fear and determination warred inside him. Karen's hostility was no longer just words or torn letters. It was now a direct threat. As James stared into the darkness, he vowed he wouldn't back down. Not now. Not ever. The mystery behind Karen's hatred was still hidden, but James was closer than ever to uncovering the truth. And when he did, the quiet neighborhood would never be the same again. The day of the HOA meeting arrived like a storm. Gathering on the horizon, James could feel the weight of every eye on him as he stepped into the community center, a room thick with silent judgments and whispered fears. The air buzzed with anticipation, as if the neighborhood was holding its breath, waiting to see who would blink first. Karen was already there, perched at the front like a queen, surveying her court. Her cold smile greeted him, but her eyes were sharp knives, slicing through the thin veil of civility. The room fell silent when she spotted James, and a ripple of uneasy murmurs spread through the crowd. James clenched his fists, but forced himself to breathe steady and calm. This was his moment. The moment to stand up, not just for himself, but for every quiet victim, silenced by Karen's ruthless grip. When the meeting began, Karen took charge with practiced ease, rattling off rules and regulations as if reciting scripture. But James had come prepared. He stepped forward, voice firm, projecting over the low hum of the crowd. "I'm here because I have evidence," he said, holding up his phone. "Evidence that Karen has been destroying my mail, deliberately. And worse, that she's been harassing me because I'm a veteran." Gasps echoed through the room. Karen's smile faltered for a split second, but she recovered quickly, stepping forward with a venomous glare. "That's a lie," she spat. "A desperate attempt to undermine the order and safety this community depends on. You're causing trouble, James. This isn't about harassment. It's about your refusal to follow simple rules." James swallowed the burning in his throat and pressed play on the video. The room watched in stunned silence as Karen appeared on the screen, tearing letters apart and muttering dark threats. Whispers erupted. Some neighbors looked shocked, others hesitant. But Karen's face twisted with fury. "You think this changes anything?" she hissed. "You don't belong here. You don't deserve to belong." James felt a pang of old wounds. Echoes of battles fought on distant fields, now being replayed on this suburban stage. But he stood taller. "I served this country," he said steadily, "and I deserve respect, just like everyone else." The HOA board members exchanged uneasy glances. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Suddenly, Karen slammed her fist on the podium. "Enough!" she shouted. "You're all being manipulated by a man who refuses to follow the rules." At that moment, the local police officer, who had quietly been sitting at the back of the room, stood up. "I've been reviewing complaints and evidence related to this case," he said, voice steady. "Karen, you're under arrest for mail tampering and harassment." Gasps turned into shocked silence. Karen's face drained of color. For a heartbeat, she seemed stunned. Then rage exploded in her eyes. "You have no right," she screamed. "This is a witch hunt." Officers moved forward, gently but firmly placing her in handcuffs. The room was a mix of disbelief, relief, and a strange sense of justice. As Karen was led away, she shot James one last icy look. "This isn't over," she vowed. James exhaled deeply, the weight of weeks of fear and frustration lifting for the first time. But even as relief settled in, a new unease crept over him. Why had Karen hated him so much? What had driven her to such extremes? The neighborhood would never be the same. And James knew this was only the beginning of uncovering the secrets buried beneath the quiet streets. The aftermath of Karen's arrest rippled through the neighborhood like a shockwave. Some residents felt a cautious relief, believing justice had finally been served. Others whispered in hushed tones, wary of what had been revealed and what might still be hidden. James hoped that with Karen gone, the hostility would fade. But the shadows in the neighborhood were longer and darker than he had imagined. Almost immediately, strange things began happening. Late one evening, James noticed a figure standing silently near the edge of his property. The streetlight flickered, casting eerie shadows, but the person didn't move. When James stepped outside, the figure vanished into the darkness. Rumors swirled through the community. Some whispered that Karen had loyal followers, willing to continue her campaign of intimidation. Others claimed the harassment was more than just personal vendetta. It was part of a pattern targeting vulnerable residents. James felt eyes on him everywhere. Friends suddenly went silent. Packages he ordered online arrived damaged or never at all. The mailbox, though intact, no longer felt safe. Determined to uncover the truth, James began talking quietly to neighbors who had previously kept their distance. One by one, they shared stories of unexplained vandalism, threats, and intimidation that they'd endured under Karen's rule. Mrs. Alvarez, a widow who lived 3 houses down, confided in James. Karen didn't just want control, she whispered. She wanted to erase anyone who didn't fit her idea of this perfect neighborhood. I stayed quiet because I was afraid for my safety and for my son. James's heart tightened. The nightmare went deeper than he'd known. Then there was Mr. Thompson, the elderly man James had met weeks before. He revealed something that sent a chill through James's spine. Karen's bitterness isn't just about rules, Mr. Thompson said quietly. There's something personal, something tied to her family. A tragedy no one talks about. James's mind raced. What could drive someone to such hatred and cruelty? The night grew colder, and James found himself unable to sleep. He paced his living room, replaying everything he'd learned. The threat wasn't over. It had only changed shape. He knew the next step had to be gathering solid evidence, not just for Karen's crimes, but for the dark network she may have been part of. But every time he tried to dig deeper, subtle warnings came his way. A smashed window, an anonymous note slipped under his door. Leave it alone. The shadows were closing in. But James's resolve only hardened. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the entire neighborhood, to bring the light back into the shadows. And as he stared out his window into the night, James knew one thing with absolute certainty. Whatever secrets Karen had been hiding, they weren't buried deep enough. James woke to the shrill ring of his phone, slicing through the heavy silence of the early morning. The message was brief, but unmistakably urgent. Meet me at the park, midnight, alone. His heart skipped a beat. The number was unfamiliar, but the tone was unmistakably serious. That night, armed with a flashlight and the camera footage saved on his phone, James made his way to the park at the edge of the neighborhood. The moon hung low, casting long shadows over the empty benches and silent pathways. He was alone, until a figure emerged from the darkness. It was Mrs. Alvarez. "I couldn't risk telling you in public," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder, nervously. "There's more to Karen than you realize. She's been hiding something dangerous." James leaned in. "What kind of dangerous?" Mrs. Alvarez's voice dropped to a near whisper. Karen's family was shattered years ago. Something involving fraud, betrayal, and a secret that could destroy her reputation, and the HOA's grip on this town. James frowned. Why would that matter now? Because Karen wasn't just protecting the HOA rules, she said. She was protecting herself from being exposed. And she's not the only one involved. Before James could respond, a rustle in the bushes snapped their attention. Mrs. Alvarez grabbed his arm, pulling him into the shadows. A pair of headlights swept across the park, illuminating the empty benches, then vanished. They were being watched. The revelation sent a chill through James's spine. This wasn't just a neighborhood dispute. It was a cover-up, and now they were in the middle of it. Determined to get to the bottom of the mystery, James and Mrs. Alvarez began piecing together the fragments of Karen's past. Old HOA records, local court documents, and whispered rumors painted a picture of corruption and manipulation that stretched far beyond the mailbox incident. One document caught James's eye. A sealed court case involving Karen's late husband, a man who had been accused of embezzling funds from the HOA. The case was mysteriously dropped, with no clear explanation. James sensed the pieces fitting together. Karen's bitterness, her ruthless control, the vicious harassment. It was all connected to that dark family secret. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous it became. Late one night, James found his front door unlocked, the lock damaged. Inside, his papers were strewn across the floor, his camera gone. A cold warning left, in black marker on the wall: "Stop digging or pay the price." Fear and anger clashed inside him. But James was no stranger to danger. This was a battle he would fight to the end. With Mrs. Alvarez by his side, James resolved to expose the truth, not just about Karen, but the entire network that had thrived in the shadows of this quiet neighborhood. The stakes were higher than ever, but so was his determination. In the darkness of the night, James felt the faintest spark of hope. The truth was within reach, and once revealed, it would shake the neighborhood to its core. The night was thick with tension, as James and Mrs. Alvarez sat huddled in his living room, poring over documents and notes they'd scavenged from county records and old HOA files. The flickering light of the single lamp cast long shadows, mirroring the weight of the secrets they'd uncovered. Karen's family tragedy was more than just personal pain. It was a carefully guarded scandal that had silently shaped the entire neighborhood's power dynamics. The embezzlement case against Karen's late husband, abruptly dropped years ago, had been the linchpin of a much larger scheme involving inflated HOA fees, shady contractors, and silent threats. James rubbed his tired eyes. "If we can prove this," he said, voice barely above a whisper, "we can bring down not just Karen, but the whole corrupt system she's been protecting." Mrs. Alvarez nodded solemnly. "But they know we're on them. We have to be careful." Suddenly, the doorbell rang sharply. James's heart lurched. No one was supposed to be there this late. He peeked through the peephole. No one was there. When he opened the door cautiously, he found an unmarked envelope on the doorstep. Inside was a single sheet of paper, scrawled with a chilling message. "Back off, veteran, or you'll regret it." The warning was clear. Despite the threat, James felt a surge of resolve. He would not be intimidated. The next day, armed with the evidence they'd gathered, James arranged to meet with a local investigative journalist, known for exposing corruption. The meeting place was a discreet coffee shop, tucked away from prying eyes. As James laid out the story, the journalist's eyes widened. "This could blow the roof off the whole town," she said. "But you need more proof. Something concrete." James nodded. "I'm working on that, but Karen and her allies are watching. I'm running out of time." Meanwhile, Karen, now out on bail, was stirring trouble behind the scenes. She called an emergency HOA meeting, rallying her remaining supporters. Her words were venomous and persuasive, painting James as a dangerous outsider and a liar. But cracks were showing. Some neighbors were beginning to question the narrative they'd been fed for so long. Then, late one evening, James received an anonymous tip. A flash drive hidden in his mailbox. Inside were damning recordings, phone calls and meetings between HOA officials, discussing kickbacks, intimidation tactics, and plans to silence dissenters. The evidence was explosive. But as James prepared to go public, the shadows closed in once more. That night, someone smashed his car window. On the dashboard, a note, "Last warning." James knew the final confrontation was near. With the community watching and the truth threatening to explode, the battle lines were drawn. And in the quiet tension before the storm, James steeled himself for what was to come. The day dawned cold and grey, mirroring the tension that gripped the neighborhood. James sat at his kitchen table, the flash drive lying before him like a loaded weapon. The evidence it contained was enough to topple the HOA's corrupt empire, but it also made him a target. Word had spread that James was planning to expose the truth. Neighborhood eyes were on him, some filled with hope, others with fear or resentment. As he prepared to meet with the investigative journalist, a sudden knock shattered the quiet. He opened the door to find Officer Martinez, the same local cop who had arrested Karen. "We need to talk," she said, stepping inside with a serious expression. "There's been a development." The two sat down as Martinez revealed a stunning update. The state attorney's office had launched a full investigation into the HOA, prompted by the flash drive's evidence and complaints from residents. Karen and several HOA board members faced charges ranging from fraud to intimidation. But there was more. Martinez lowered her voice. "We've also uncovered something else, something tied to Karen's late husband's case. It wasn't just embezzlement. There was a cover-up involving a powerful local developer who wanted control over this land." James felt the weight of the revelation. The neighborhood's quiet. Streets hit a dangerous game of greed and power. With new allies in law enforcement and the media, James's fight turned into a movement. Residents who had once stayed silent began speaking out, sharing their stories of fear and abuse. Karen's supporters dwindled, their carefully constructed world crumbling. Then came the day of the final HOA hearing. Broadcast live to the community, James stood before the board, his evidence laid bare. The tension was electric. Karen tried to defend herself, her voice trembling with anger and desperation, but the truth was undeniable. As the hearing concluded, the HOA board was dissolved, replaced by a new, transparent leadership, committed to rebuilding trust. But the biggest surprise came afterward. Karen's former ally, Mr. Thompson, stepped forward with a confession. He revealed that Karen's hatred toward James wasn't just about rules or control. It was deeply personal. Years ago, Karen had accused James of something terrible, something that had been investigated and dismissed. But the scars remained. Her cruel words about him, not deserving male, had been fueled by pain and twisted jealousy. Yet, in the end, Karen's downfall was her own making. A tragic figure, destroyed by bitterness and greed. James stood outside his home, the sun breaking. Through clouds for the first time in weeks, the mailbox stood untouched, a quiet symbol of victory and healing. Neighbors came by, offering smiles and apologies. The community was scarred, but resilient. James knew the battle had changed him. He had faced darkness, both in others and within himself, and emerged stronger. As he looked down the street, he realized this was more than just a neighborhood story. It was a testament to courage, truth, and the power of standing up when it matters most. And for the first time in a long time, James felt at peace.